All right, folks, continuing on our very exciting journey of photosynthesis. First thing you got to know there are two stages. There's two, not one, not three, not four, not five, but two different stages in photosynthesis, two different reactions. The first one is called the light-dependent reaction. Guess why they call it that? Because it is dependent or it needs light. The first reaction needs light or it will not happen. It will not occur without light. The second stage or reaction in photosynthesis is called the light-independent reaction because it does not require light. It's independent. It doesn't require light for it to happen. It can happen in the dark. It is also called the Calvin cycle. So it can be called either one. Sometimes they call it the dark reaction. I don't call it that. So the first one is the light-dependent reaction. And the second one is called the light-independent reaction or the Calvin cycle. Those are the names of the two stages in photosynthesis. In the first reaction, so this is the first one right here. This is where water is used. Remember, we're going to use water and we're going to use CO2. We do not use CO2 in the first stage. We use water. And water gets split into its hydrogen ions, because remember it's H2O, so water gets split into hydrogen ions, and this is where oxygen gas is created. And that oxygen gas just floats up into the air, and eventually we can breathe it in. The second stage of photosynthesis right here, the light-independent reaction or the Calvin cycle, this is where CO2 is used, and that CO2 is used to produce the final product of photosynthesis, which is glucose, which is C6H12O6. All right, so here's just a little table that summarizes the steps of photosynthesis. Remember, this is part one, or the first reaction on the left, the light-dependent reaction. The second step over here on the right, that's the light-independent or the Calvin cycle. Where do these occur? That's the first thing. The light-dependent reaction needs light. Remember, chlorophyll is the pigment which absorbs light. Chlorophyll is green. So the light-dependent reaction occurs in those green discs, or those green pancakes, which we call the thylakoids. And precisely it occurs on the very outer edge, the membrane of the thylakoid. So it occurs in the thylakoid membrane, the very outside of these green discs. Also remember, if you have a stack of these green discs together, that is called a granum or a grana for plural. All right, so what is required? What are the reactants? The reactants for the light-dependent reaction? Well, this is where we need water, of course. We also need NADP, which is like a dead battery, and we all know ADP, another dead battery, adenosine diphosphate with two phosphates. Remember, NADP, it's going to pick up a hydrogen and it's going to carry electrons. That's all you really need to know about Mr. NADP. It's going to carry electrons. What gets produced? Well, remember, this is where O2, oxygen gas, gets created, and it floats off into the air, where eventually we can breathe it in. But what plants really care about, they get these two charged batteries. They get ATP and NADPH. So the NADP became NADPH because it picked up a hydrogen ion and it picked up electrons, high energy electrons. That's what these guys do. They carry electrons. And these two charged batteries are going to be used over here in the Calvin cycle. All right, so the Calvin cycle, where does it occur? The stroma. Remember, the stroma is everything inside the chloroplast that is not within these green discs. So everything outside of these green discs, the thylakoids, is called the stroma. The fluid outside those green pancakes is the stroma. That is where this reaction takes place. What is required? Well, this is where CO2 gets used, carbon dioxide, plus we need the energy from these two charged batteries, ATP and NADPH. We need the electrons from NADPH to power this reaction. And what's the final product? Well, of course, glucose, C6H12O6. All right, the last slide on this little unit on photosynthesis. So you can cut this whole thing right here is a chloroplast. The whole guy, the whole oval thing, that's a chloroplast. And if you cut this thing like in half, on this side, step 1, light dependent reaction. And over here is step 2, the light independent reaction or the Calvin cycle. So basically you need to remember which arrows go in, like this arrow's going in, and which arrows are coming out. That's going out. This is going out. So remember what goes in and what goes out. So get rid of those arrows. In the light reaction, this is where we use water. Water comes in. It goes into the thylakoids. This is also where light is being used. These two dead batteries, NADP, it's looking to get some electrons to carry, and ADP, another dead battery, they're coming into the thylakoids. What comes out? Well, this is where oxygen gas gets produced because water gets split in half, and this oxygen floats off into the air. But more importantly for the plant, this is where the charged batteries of ATP and NADPH get produced. And those are used to power the Calvin cycle. In the second step, the Calvin cycle, this is where CO2 comes into the chloroplast. Remember, this happens outside of the green disc. This happens what's called the stroma. So everything outside of these green discs is called the stroma. And CO2, using the energy from these two charged batteries, creates C6H12O6 or glucose sugar.